It was supposed to be an ordinary birthday sleepover in 1975, but by morning, one of the girls was gone, without a sound, without a trace. What happened inside that attic would haunt an entire town for years. The truth stayed buried until someone accidentally uncovered it 6 years later. Stay with us till the end to uncover every chilling detail of this true nightmare. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will leave you breathless. It was the evening of Saturday, October 18th, 1975, when 11-year-old Catherine Harper disappeared. The last known sighting of her was in the dimly lit living room of her best friend's home in the quiet town of Mill Creek, Oregon, a town so small you could hear the church bell ring clear across the valley. That weekend had started out like any other. No one suspected the night would birth a mystery that would come to haunt every street, every home, every family within the town limits, and even beyond. The birthday girl was Rebecca Linney, also 11, a sharp, imaginative girl whose parents, Joe and Margaret Linney, were known for their tidy yard, warm hospitality, and strict household rules. The Linneys had only allowed a few girls to spend the night, 5 in total, all from the same class at Mill Creek Elementary. The celebration was low-key. Cake, streamers, records spinning low on the turntable, and the soft glow of jack-o'-lanterns on the porch, still up from the early Halloween decorations. It was chilly that night, in the high 40s. The smell of wet leaves clung to the air. At 7:41 p.m., Joe Linney left the house to pick up extra soda. Margaret stayed home with the girls, who were in their pajamas watching The Ghost and Mrs. Muir on a small Zenith TV in the living room. At 8:12 p.m., she brought in popcorn and soda, checked on everyone, and reminded them not to open the door for anyone. The night passed with whispers and giggles, story swapping, and flashlight games. At 10:03 p.m., according to Margaret, she peeked in once more and saw all 5 girls under their sleeping bags, 2 dozing off, the others whispering quietly. Catherine had her long, dark hair pulled into a loose braid and was curled up next to the fireplace. That was the last time anyone could say, with absolute certainty, that they saw her. By morning, she was gone. The Linneys called Catherine's mother, Evelyn Harper, at 7:28 a.m. to ask if she had come home early or perhaps felt sick. She had not. Evelyn, still in her nightgown, dropped the phone and screamed. Catherine was a shy, polite girl, not one to wander off or disobey. She hated being outside in the dark. She hated being cold. She didn't even like using a public bathroom alone. There was no chance she had gone anywhere by herself. The other 4 girls, bleary-eyed and confused, insisted Catherine had been there all night. Every single one swore they remembered talking to her before falling asleep. None of them heard her leave. No one heard the door open. No one heard footsteps. No one noticed anything strange, except for one. Lucy Henderson ***, a soft-spoken redhead with a habit of biting her nails, said she had seen Catherine standing near the kitchen doorway at some point in the night. She thought it was Catherine, but she hadn't spoken. She said Catherine was just standing there like she was listening to something in the hallway. When Lucy looked again, she was gone. The police were called by 8:06 a.m. At 8:47, Officer Rennie Hall arrived at the Linney residence. The search began almost immediately, with volunteers combing through the nearby woods, drainage ditches, and roadsides. Mill Creek didn't have much crime, and the local sheriff's department was more used to dealing with parking disputes and wildlife complaints than child disappearances. By noon, panic had settled over the town like fog. Inside the Linney home, Evelyn Harper sat pale and unmoving on the living room couch, while her husband, Thomas, paced in circles. He had barely spoken since arriving. His fists were clenched the entire time, and the look in his eyes was that of a man watching his world crumble in real time. The 4 girls were questioned separately, over and over. Not one changed her story. They all remembered Catherine being there until the very end of the night. They remembered laughing together. One said she remembered Catherine snoring. Another said she felt her sleeping bag move next to hers when Catherine rolled over. It made no sense. There were no signs of forced entry. No muddy footprints. No open windows. No doors ajar. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. The family dog hadn't barked, and yet Catherine was gone, vanished like a puff of breath in the cold October night. Word spread through Mill Creek like wildfire. The church bells were rung. Flyers were stapled to poles. Radio stations began running hourly updates. By the next evening, the Linney house was swarmed with news vans, their spotlights glaring against the fall gloom. Reporters asking pointed questions that made Margaret Linney break down sobbing on her front porch. Evelyn Harper refused to go home. She slept on the Linney's couch for 3 nights straight, waiting, hoping that her daughter would return. But each morning, the sleeping bag on the far right remained empty. The investigation stretched through the weeks that followed. The FBI eventually got involved. Psychics came forward with visions. Anonymous letters were mailed to the Harper home. Someone claimed to have seen a girl resembling Catherine in a gas station in Eugene, 90 miles south. Another person said they heard a child screaming in the woods behind Birch Lane. But every lead evaporated. Every tip went nowhere. And time passed. In the months that followed, Evelyn and Thomas Harper became strangers in their own marriage. Grief hollowed them out. They barely spoke, moved through their days like sleepwalkers. Evelyn set the dinner table for 3 every night. She left the porch light on. She refused to change Catherine's bedsheets or wash her favorite cardigan, which still hung on the back of the chair in her room. A part of her refused to believe she was truly gone. Not murdered, not taken, just missing. The Linneys eventually moved. The whispers had gotten too loud. People wondered if Margaret had fallen asleep, if Joe had left the door unlocked, if one of the girls had lied. Rebecca stopped going to school. She began wetting the bed again, refused to talk to anyone but her mother, and developed a paralyzing fear of closets. Eventually, they left Mill Creek altogether. Their house stood empty for almost 2 years. The town changed. Parents grew more cautious. Children weren't allowed out after dark. Halloween trick-or-treating was canceled that year. And the next, for 6 years, the Harper family lived in limbo. Evelyn eventually joined a missing children's network and spent every vacation day traveling across counties chasing down any sighting that resembled her daughter. Thomas, who had once been a mechanic with a laugh that could shake the walls, stopped showing up to work altogether. In 1979, they divorced. Evelyn stayed in Mill Creek. Thomas moved to Idaho and never came back. Then, in 1981, everything changed. It began with a renovation. A couple named the Whitmans purchased the long-abandoned Linney home. They planned to restore it and move in with their newborn daughter. On a foggy April morning, a contractor named Roy Delaney was pulling up old floorboards in the small pantry adjacent to the kitchen. The same pantry Catherine had supposedly passed near, according to Lucy's story. Under the second layer of cracked boards, Roy found something odd, a shallow crawl space. And in that crawl space, nestled between beams and decades-old insulation, he found a child's red and white friendship bracelet, the kind that was handmade with yarn, the kind Catherine had been wearing the night she vanished. It had her initials on it, Tsiha. Beneath it, wrapped in waxy paper and old linen, was a crumpled Polaroid photograph. The image was blurred, but you could make out 5 girls in sleeping bags on the living room floor, just as the Linneys had described. All were sleeping. All looked peaceful. But what struck investigators cold was the time stamp. October 18th, 1975, 3:17 a.m. It had been taken from a hallway, through the open archway of the living room. None of the girls were awake. Someone had been in the house, and someone had taken that picture. Evelyn was called immediately. She held the bracelet to her lips, collapsed to her knees, and wept. It was Catherine's. She had made it herself. She remembered watching her daughter braid it one morning while eating cereal. The police reopened the case. This time, they weren't looking for a lost girl. They were looking for a silent ghost in the walls of a seemingly safe home. A shadow that had slipped in unnoticed, stood long enough to take a picture, and then vanished with a child in the middle of the night without making a sound. They had missed something, and 6 years later, whatever it was still there. The photo changed everything. It was no longer a case of a missing girl. It was a break-in, a violation, a presence inside the Linney home that night. A presence no one had seen, no one had heard, and that somehow managed to leave with a child without a trace. The crawlspace discovery triggered not just a fresh round of police activity, but a tremor that rippled across Mill Creek like the aftershock of a buried quake. Detectives from the State Crime Lab swarmed the house within hours. The Whitmans were asked to vacate for the time being. Floorboards were removed in every room. Old insulation was tested. Every nail, board, fiber, and trace of dust was combed for evidence. But the most chilling discovery came from the photo itself. Despite its blur, when scanned under high magnification, analysts identified a reflection, barely visible, in the glass of a picture frame hanging on the wall across the room. A shape, tall, humanoid. It wasn't possible to determine gender or identity. It could have been anyone. It could have been no one. But it was enough. 6 years earlier, no one had searched for a stalker. Now, they were forced to ask, had someone been watching the Linney family? Watching the girls? The bracelet was confirmed to have trace DNA matching Evelyn and Catherine. It had not been planted. It had been there the whole time. In Evelyn's eyes, the bracelet was not just a piece of fabric. It was her daughter's voice, buried for 6 long years under layers of silence. She took it home, wrapped it in a velvet handkerchief, and placed it beside Catherine's photograph on the mantel. For the first time in years, she had something real to hold, something that hadn't been taken from her. The news reignited the town's suppressed hysteria. What had been buried, emotionally and socially, came bubbling back with force. Talk shows picked up the story. Radio stations revisited their old broadcasts. Reporters came calling again, older, more hardened, but just as eager to chase the headline. Asterisk, new clue in 1975 Mill Creek disappearance. Asterisk. Then came the tip. An anonymous envelope arrived at the Mill Creek police station 3 days after the story broke. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper. Typed. She was never outside. You were looking in the wrong place. Go back to the house. Look where the heat doesn't reach. There was no return address. No fingerprints. Just a message that chilled the blood of every officer who read it. The Whitman house, formerly the Linney home, was researched with heat sensors and infrared imaging. One room, the hallway closet near the bathroom, showed unusually cold readings in its back panel. It had always been assumed to be poor insulation, until they removed the drywall. Behind it was a narrow cavity no more than 18 inches wide, stretching vertically between the walls, inaccessible unless someone knew it was there. Inside the cavity, nestled deep in the dark, they found a crumpled scrap of paper with 5 childish signatures: Rebecca, Lucy, Hannah, Meg, and Catherine. Catherine's was the last. Her handwriting was shaky. On the back was scribbled something else. The words were faint, but visible under blacklight. He made me be quiet. He was already in the house. Investigators were stunned. How had this been missed? Who was he? And what did she mean? He was already in the house. Evelyn's face drained of color when she was told. She didn't speak for a long time. Finally, in a voice as fragile as smoke, she said she never would have written that unless she thought no one was coming. The 4 other girls, now teenagers scattered across different towns, were contacted for re-interviews. Most were hesitant. Some were frightened. But they agreed. Rebecca Linney ***, now living in Seattle, had spent years in therapy. She suffered from sleep paralysis and recurring nightmares involving walls that whispered. When shown the photograph, she trembled, said she remembered the flash. But she had always assumed it was the television. Then she said something no one expected. I remember seeing her in the hallway. But it wasn't her. It was like someone pretending to be her. Detectives pressed her. She insisted she wasn't dreaming. Her hair looked off. Her eyes didn't look at me. It was like her body was there, but not her. Like a puppet. They dismissed it as trauma, hallucination, repressed memory, until Lucy Henderson, the redhead who originally claimed to see Catherine in the kitchen doorway, said something similar. She was just standing there, but something was wrong with her. She was too still, too quiet. Her hands were at her sides like she was waiting for something. Something was becoming disturbingly clear. The girls had seen Catherine after she'd already vanished. At least, that's what they thought. But perhaps what they saw wasn't Catherine at all, or at least not Catherine in her right mind. Back in Mill Creek, Evelyn began receiving silent phone calls at night. The line would go dead after a few seconds. Once she heard breathing. Another time, a faint music box playing a familiar lullaby, a song she used to sing to Catherine. She reported it. Police tapped her phone, but nothing concrete ever traced back to a source. Then, on a fogged-up window in her kitchen, she found a small handprint. It was positioned low, like a child had pressed it there from inside the house. But Evelyn lived alone. The townspeople were rattled again. Whispers returned. Old suspicions resurfaced. Some still believed one of the girls knew more than she let on. Others theorized a stranger had lived in the crawl spaces or attic of the Linney home undetected for weeks. Maybe longer. One man stood out. Raymond Callow **, age 67, was the Linney's former neighbor. He had lived 2 doors down from the Linney house in 1975, and though quiet and odd, had never been accused of anything. He'd passed away in 1978 from a stroke. But as police reviewed the neighborhood watch logs and interviews from the original investigation, one detail emerged that no one had connected at the time. Raymond had once worked as a janitor at Mill Creek Elementary. In 1974, he had been let go quietly after a complaint from a teacher who had found him lingering in the girls' restroom hallway after hours. No charges had been filed. In his basement, untouched since his death, police found a locked cedar chest. Inside, a collection of small trinkets. A hairbrush, a ballet slipper, a plastic locket, all of them dated, labeled, and tagged. Children's names. One was labeled Catherine Harper, October 17, the day before she disappeared. No one had searched his house back then. He wasn't on the suspect list. No one had ever imagined. The items were tagged into evidence. But no trace of Catherine, no clothing, no remains, no physical proof of her fate was found. Still, it was a thread. One more question persisted. How had someone entered a locked house, taken a child in the night, and vanished, leaving behind no broken locks, no noise, no wake-ups? And then there was that terrifying phrase from her note. He was already in the house. In June 1981, Detective Harlan Craig, now leading the reopened investigation, ordered a full thermal imaging and mapping of the home's architecture. That's when a bombshell revelation surfaced. Behind the upstairs linen closet, behind a false wall that even the Linneys hadn't known existed, was a narrow passage that ran along the plumbing, large enough for a man to crawl through, all the way down to the pantry floor. There was no entry from outside. It was internal. Whoever had taken Catherine hadn't broken in. He had lived there. He had watched. Waited, hidden, maybe for days, maybe longer. That night in 1975, he'd simply slipped out of the wall, picked her up, and walked her back into the dark with him. The discovery of the hidden crawl passage inside the Linney home changed everything again. It wasn't just about the presence of someone in the house anymore. It was about how long they had been there, about what they had been watching, about what they had waited for. Detective Harlan Craig stood in the upstairs hallway, his eyes fixed on the removed section of drywall. A cold draft snaked through the narrow, dust-choked space beyond. The silence inside, it was not ordinary. It was the kind of silence that felt lived in, like a soundless breath had been exhaled and frozen in place for years. They lowered a micro camera into the cavity and found scrawled pencil marks on the wood beams, dates, names, drawings. Among them was one unmistakable message, scratched into the timber with something sharp. I waited, but no one came. They brought Evelyn to the house. It took her several long minutes to step through the front door. She hadn't entered the Linney residence since the morning after Catherine vanished. Her eyes were wide, cautious, like every creak of the floorboards might be her daughter's voice trying to call out from another time. They didn't show her the crawl space immediately. First, Harlan showed her the drawings. Crude shapes, a flower, a cat, a house. One, smaller and fainter, was of 5 girls in sleeping bags with a figure drawn in the corner, tall and dark, with no face. Evelyn ran her fingers across the markings. She whispered her daughter's name as though it might still be caught in the wood grain. "We didn't find a body," Harlan told her quietly. "But she was here, Evelyn. For a while. She was here." Evelyn nodded, but her lips trembled. "How long?" He hesitated. "It's hard to say. Days. Maybe longer." A scream cracked through her, primal and wounded. She collapsed to the ground, sobbing into her hands. Officers outside turned away. Harlan knelt beside her, steady and quiet, because what could he say? That her child might have been locked behind walls while the world searched ditches and forests? They began tearing open every corner of the house. They removed entire wall panels. They dug under the floor. They even removed an old chimney column where fibers of a child's shirt were later found, snagged in the brickwork. The fabric was blue and matched the pajamas Catherine had been wearing the night she vanished. DNA confirmed it, but there was still no sign of Catherine herself, just remnants. And then the letter came. It arrived at the Harper residence on August 12, 1981, exactly 1 month before what would have been Catherine's 18th birthday. It wasn't mailed. It had been slid under Evelyn's door in the middle of the night. The envelope was unmarked, yellowed from age. Inside was a single handwritten note. "She's not gone. You just didn't see. You never looked close enough. No fingerprints. No return address." But something about the handwriting struck Evelyn cold. It wasn't Catherine's. She didn't recognize it. But something about it, it felt familiar, as if it had been written by someone who knew her. Forensics confirmed the paper was old. At least 5 years. The ink had faded slightly, but hadn't been weathered. It had been preserved. Then came a second letter, August 18th. This one was shorter. She had the bracelet. She wanted you to have it. The bracelet, Catherine's red and white friendship band, had only recently been found in the crawlspace. But no one outside law enforcement had known that. Someone was watching. Someone had been watching. Harlan ordered a full surveillance setup on Evelyn's house. Every corner monitored. Evelyn herself, emotionally drained but resolute, agreed to wear a wire during all hours. She started sleeping downstairs, her daughter's photo always nearby, her hands always clutching the bracelet wrapped in its velvet cloth. Days passed. No letters. No movement. Until the third letter arrived, September 3, just after midnight. This one came taped to the inside of Evelyn's bathroom mirror. I can still hear her. In the walls. You never heard her, but I did. She's not gone. She's still mine. This time, Evelyn screamed loud enough to wake the neighborhood. The house was searched. Every inch. But nothing was found. Whoever had left it had gotten in, gotten out, and left no sign. Again. Then something else happened. Lucy Henderson, now 17, was found in her bedroom, collapsed from a panic attack. Her mother said Lucy had been having sleep disturbances again, waking up saying someone was at the window. Someone was whispering to her. When Harlan visited her, Lucy was pale and twitchy, her fingers trembling as she gripped a worn book to her chest. It was Catherine's diary. Catherine had lent it to her the week before the sleepover and never asked for it back. Lucy had kept it all these years. Inside were scribbles, poems, and thoughts, typical for a preteen. But on the last page, written in a rushed, uneven hand, were the words. "He listens through the heater. He knows when we talk. Don't tell anyone. Don't say anything. Just pretend I'm asleep." Harlan turned to Lucy. "Did you ever see him?" She shook her head. "No, but I felt him. I think we all did. We just didn't understand what it was." He asked what she meant. She hesitated, then said, "The air used to feel wrong sometimes, like someone was breathing through the walls." Harlan had the HVAC system of the Linney home examined. In the old ductwork, they found several crumpled gum wrappers and one small marble, the kind Catherine had collected. Near the junction where the ducts turned toward the crawl space, they found something else. A pair of child's glasses, folded, untouched, left there as if someone had gently placed them for safekeeping. Catherine had worn glasses. Her prescription was recorded in her medical records. They were hers. The horror of the truth began to creep in. She hadn't just been taken that night. She'd been kept, hidden, quiet, maybe manipulated, maybe brainwashed, or worse. There was a new theory developing in Harlan's mind, one he dared not voice yet. But it lingered like rot. What if Catherine had been held there in the house for days, weeks, and the girls had seen her because she was still there? What if the quiet girl standing in the hallway wasn't a dream or a sleep-addled memory? What if they had been looking at her, just a version of her changed by trauma, by silence? What if she had wanted to come back, but couldn't? And what if someone still had her? In late September, Evelyn began experiencing strange things in her house. Her record player turned on by itself. One morning, she woke up and found her daughter's favorite stuffed bear sitting in the middle of the hallway, moved from its sealed box in the attic. She called Harland. He stayed overnight. Nothing happened until just before dawn. They both heard it, a soft scraping sound from inside the wall, long drawn out, like fingernails dragging across the studs. It stopped as suddenly as it began. They punched open the wall that morning. Inside, they found a photo, fresh, untouched, a Polaroid showing a small handprint against a fogged window. Dated in red marker, 1978. Catherine had still been alive 3 years after she vanished, and someone had been photographing her the entire time. The photograph changed the scope of the case again. It was no longer just a hunt for clues, no longer just the slow resurrection of cold facts buried in forgotten walls. The image proved Catherine had been alive 3 years after the world gave up on her. And worse, it showed that someone had been keeping her, monitoring her, and documenting her captivity. It was time to stop treating this as a missing persons case. Harlan Craig called in the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. He requested a full psychological profile based on what they had so far. Someone who had access to the Linney house undetected, possibly for weeks or longer, and had lived in the crawl spaces. Someone intelligent, patient, meticulous. Someone who had slipped into the lives of children and taken one without resistance. The term covert domestic predator was whispered behind closed doors. But there was something deeper, something that unsettled even the seasoned agents who came to Mill Creek. The letters, the Polaroids, the handprints, the silence. This wasn't just a physical abduction. This was a psychological siege. Someone had been playing a long game, and that someone might still be playing it. Evelyn began to deteriorate. She was holding on, but barely. The hope of her daughter being alive, of possibly being rescued, tangled with the unimaginable fear of what Catherine must have endured. Her eyes were hollow most days, haunted not by grief anymore, but by anticipation, the unbearable weight of waiting. Then the fourth letter came. October 16th, 1981, ***, 2 days before the 6th anniversary of Catherine's disappearance. It was taped to Evelyn's refrigerator. Again, no sign of a break-in. No camera footy. No alarm stripped. This time, the message was longer. She didn't cry. She listened. She waited like I told her. She watched them through the cracks. She still listens. But she's not alone anymore. Not since the others. Others. The word hit like a detonation. Harlan stared at the note in silence, then read it again, slower. She's not alone anymore. It meant there had been more children. Or there still were. The idea was almost too horrific to entertain. Had someone continued after Catherine? Had someone been taking other children, quietly, slowly, surgically, without anyone connecting the dots? The FBI checked all surrounding counties for unsolved juvenile disappearances over the last decade. They found 3, all within a 120-mile radius of Mill Creek. 1979, Delia Marsh ***, age 9, vanished from a church sleepover in Florence, Oregon. 1980, Thomas Reddick ***, age 10, disappeared while walking home from school in Bend. 1981, Megan Klaus ***, age 8, last seen playing in her backyard in Troutdale. All 3 cases had gone cold. All had elements in common. No forced entry, no witnesses, no footprints, no sign of struggle. And all children have been described by their families as sensitive, quiet, or imaginative. The word listens began to take on a darker meaning. Harland had the letters re-examined. Though no prints were found, trace particulates revealed microscopic remnants of fiberglass insulation and aged varnish, both common in old attic spaces. The center had been writing from inside places. Crawl spaces. Walls. Hidden spots. They didn't just hide. They lived hidden. Evelyn wasn't told everything. Harlan knew she couldn't take much more. But she began to feel it. The weight of something larger than her child's disappearance. A system. A pattern. A predator not born of impulse, but ritual. Then something happened that none of them could have anticipated. On October 17th, 1981, the day before the 6th anniversary, a woman showed up at the Mill Creek station. Her name was Eliza Dane, a former housekeeper who had worked for the Linney family for a brief period in 1975, just 2 months before Catherine vanished. She was trembling. "I don't know if it means anything," she said, "but I've lived with it too long. I should have said something years ago." Harlan brought her into an interview room. She pulled a small bag from her purse and laid out 3 items on the table. A silver whistle, a miniature stuffed owl, and a key. "I found these in the floor vent while cleaning one afternoon." This was before the party, before Catherine disappeared. I asked Margaret Linney about them, but she said they probably belonged to Rebecca. I wasn't so sure. Harlan stared at the items. The whistle matched a type sold in Mill Creek's 5 and dime in the mid-70s. The owl, hand-stitched, wasn't familiar. But the key was small. Rusted. Residential. Old-fashioned. Eliza continued. There was also a smell in the pantry. A sour smell. Like damp wood and something else, something living. I thought they had mice. But sometimes when I went in to clean, I thought I heard breathing. Her voice cracked on the last word. Harlan ordered DNA testing on the owl's fabric. They found trace epithelial cells. Partial match to Catherine Harper. But there was something else. The key. Asterisk asterisk. It fit the backdoor lock of the Linney home, but only before it had been replaced in 1976. That meant someone other than the family had access. Harlan traced the key type to a locksmith in Portland who confirmed that 5 copies had been made for that address in 1975. 1 for the family, 1 backup, 2 spares. That left a 5th unaccounted for. Who had the 5th key? There were no answers, just gaps. And then came the break no one saw coming. October 18th, 1981. Asterisk asterisk the anniversary. Evelyn received one last letter. It wasn't like the others. It was a map, drawn in pencil, smudged, primitive. But unmistakably, it depicted the old Byers textile mill, an abandoned building on the outskirts of town, shut down since 1969 and left to rot. It had been condemned, fenced off, scheduled for demolition for years, but forgotten by most. On the map was a single line of text. She listened here. Harlan didn't wait. A full team was deployed within the hour. They tore down the old fence, broke into the main structure, and began searching with dogs, sensors, and drills. Inside the far wall of the basement boiler room, beneath rusted ducts and collapsed beams, they found it. A chamber, handmade, carved into the earth behind the wall, accessible only by crawling through an old maintenance shaft. Inside was a room, 5 feet wide, 7 feet deep, lined with rotted insulation and old sleeping bags. A toy bear, a broken flashlight, a shoelace, empty food tins, and a name scratched into the wall over and over again. Catherine Harper, asterisk asterisk. Some dated 1975. Others dated asterisk 1977, 1978, even 1980, asterisk. The room had been used for years, but it was empty now. No remains, no sign of anyone alive. But there was one last thing. Taped to the back of the wall, under a rusted pipe, was a final Polaroid. Catherine, older, thin, pale, maybe 14, maybe 15. Her hair longer, eyes hollow. She was holding the bracelet, and she was smiling. By the time October of 1981 arrived, the foliage in Brookhaven turned to that deep rusted gold that made the town look like it had been dipped in firelight. The pain that had taken root in the Breyer family 6 years earlier hadn't dulled. It had simply spread its vines. Laura Breyer moved through her days like a ghost in her own body, still teaching at the elementary school, still passing the empty bedroom upstairs without peeking in. But the newly recovered Polaroid from the treehouse had ignited something in Thomas Breyer that could not be smothered. He wasn't sleeping anymore, not even pretending. His eyes were reddened coals, burning through files, maps, and old tapes each night. But it wasn't just him. Officer Elkins, too, had grown distant from the structured limitations of protocol. The photo of Emily, clearly taken the night she vanished, clearly unexplainable, had changed the landscape of the case. And when the lab finally confirmed that the handwriting scrawled on the back matched one of the Sleepover girls, Kelsey Monroe, it all fractured open again. Kelsey, now a young woman of 22, had moved to Denver 3 years ago. The last time she'd spoken publicly about that night was during the original investigation, where her answers had been polite, rehearsed flat. But now, summoned again with new pressure and a looming threat of obstruction charges, she flew back home. They met her at the precinct, her pale face even whiter against the bland cinder-block walls of the interview room. She trembled more than she spoke. But eventually, in a quiet voice, she offered a confession, not of guilt, but of memory. "I woke up," she whispered, and Emily was sitting up, just sitting like she was listening. Everyone else was still asleep. I didn't know what time it was, but she wasn't right. I called her name, and she looked at me like she didn't recognize me. And then she said something. I never told anyone because I thought maybe I dreamed it. But now, I'm not sure anymore. Elkins leaned forward. What did she say? Kelsey swallowed. She said, "He's already inside." Those 4 words sent a chill across the room like a death rattle. Elkins sat back, blood draining from his knuckles. Thomas just stared. "He's already inside." The tape was rewound, replayed, documented. What followed in the coming weeks was a series of breakthroughs none of them expected, including Laura. When Thomas combed through every photo taken at that party, duplicates he'd gathered years ago, he noticed something that hadn't clicked before. In one shot, taken by a disposable Kodak, a shadow in the corner of the frame near the sliding back door. It was distorted, almost like it didn't belong. Enlarged and lightened, the shape was unmistakable. A hand, not a child, not one that belonged to any known adult present that night. And it was not empty. The hand was holding a small object, metallic, later confirmed to be the same design and size as the old-fashioned baby monitor the Bryars had set up to listen from the upstairs bedroom, long since discarded. But in that photo, someone had it in their possession. Someone who shouldn't have. New questions flooded in. Why would someone remove a baby monitor? Why was it outside? How had this gone unnoticed for so long? Laura remembered something then. Something she had buried deep in her grief. She had heard static that night, just after midnight, drifting from the receiver unit upstairs. Faint crackling, not speech, but like breathing, a sound she chalked up to bad reception or the wind. She hadn't thought much of it, until now. Investigators returned to the Bryer home. They removed floorboards from the closet beneath the stairs, rechecked the crawlspace, examined the old brick chimney Thomas had wanted to tear out, but never did. Nothing at all, until they started knocking. Behind the wood-paneled wall of the den, where the children had played that night, they discovered a hidden space. 4 feet wide, 8 feet long, covered in moldy insulation and blackened from time and rodents. It seemed like a storage unit or former repair cavity. Inside, they found a deteriorated sleeping bag, ancient snack wrappers from the 70s, and a child's bracelet. Emily's, her name faintly scratched into the metal plate. They also found claw marks on the inner wall. But no remains, no blood, no clothing, no Emily. It was as if she had been there, and yet never had. News exploded. The town surged with reporters again. Emily Bryer room found screamed headlines, and speculation became folklore. Theories blossomed in morbid color, that a transient had been living in the walls, that someone in the family had known, that the birthday party had been a lure, that one of the girls, maybe even Kelsey, had been involved. Laura refused all interviews. Thomas didn't speak to the press either, not until a letter arrived. Handwritten, no return address, postmarked from Southern Illinois. The paper was yellowed, and the ink bled slightly at the edges. The letter read, "You've looked in the wrong places. You think she was taken, but she left. She followed him because she already knew him. He didn't have to force her. She wanted to go. She told me not to tell. But I'm telling you now, because the dreams won't stop. She wore white. She walked out into the woods. I saw her vanish. And then the trees closed. No name, no signature. The letter hit Thomas like a mallet to the chest. He remembered something. The old neighbor, Mr. Hensley, had mentioned once back in '75 that the woods had taken things before. Nobody had paid him any mind. He was considered a drunk, a strange widower with long silences. But he had always said the same thing when kids went missing in nearby counties. The woods are hungry. They always want one more. Desperate now, Thomas and Laura returned to those woods. Armed with the letter, with Elkins and a team of cadaver dogs, they pushed beyond the known trails and into a stretch that hadn't been explored in the original search. It was late fall. The trees stood like sentinels, bare and watching. At the end of the second day, they found something. Half buried in the soil, tangled in roots, was a child's nightgown. White, torn, muddied. Next to it, a drawing. Pencil on brittle paper. A child's hand, unmistakably. It was a picture of 5 girls in sleeping bags. But only 4 had eyes. The 5th, the one in the center, had a blank, shaded face entirely filled in with black. When Laura saw it, she collapsed. They called for forensic analysis. DNA confirmed the gown had once belonged to Emily. And yet no body, no bonus, no sign of struggle. Just the drawing, just a note. And the undeniable truth, someone else had been in that house. But even worse, Emily may have left with them willingly. The old farmhouse stood silent behind the stretch of sun-bleached fields, its weathered boards sagging under the weight of forgotten years. The fence had collapsed in places, weeds choking what was once a manicured lawn. Birds fluttered from the guttering roof when the rusted screen door creaked open. Sheriff Elroy Danner stepped inside with the careful reverence of a man entering a grave. In his hand, he clutched the yellowed envelope, one that had arrived at the precinct anonymously only days earlier, addressed in neat cursive and sealed with old wax. Inside had been a single Polaroid and a hand-drawn map. The photo showed a girl, tousled brown hair, wide eyes, and a stuffed rabbit clutched tight to her chest. Not posed, not smiling, just waiting. The girl in the photo was Susanna Wells. Danner's breath had caught in his throat when he first saw it. It wasn't a new photo. It bore all the signs of time and sun fade. But the setting, the objects, and most damning of all, the exact replica of the handmade rabbit Susanna had taken with her to the sleepover, left no room for doubt. It was her. After 6 years of fog, theories, false leads, and too many tears, someone had sent the final breadcrumb. The house was located 60 miles north of Sallow Creek, abandoned since the early '80s. The map had led directly to it. The property had belonged to a man named Albert Rowan, a carpenter with a history of reclusiveness who had died of natural causes 2 years earlier, unknown and largely unmissed. But what he left behind was not silent. Downstairs had been nothing. Dusty furniture, cobwebs thick as gauze, mice droppings across the moldy linoleum. But the cellar. Danner stood now at the top of the basement stairs. The door creaked open reluctantly. Each step down echoed like a tolling bell in his chest. The smell hit him first, earthy, stale, tinged faintly with mildew and metal. His flashlight beam caught walls that had been crudely insulated with soundproof foam. A cot sat against one corner. Chains, never used but present, dangled from a pipe. A stack of old children's books was neatly aligned against the far wall. The flashlight trembled slightly in his grip. In the corner, a trunk. He knelt, unlatched it. Inside were drawings, childlike, shaky, but full of effort. Crayon suns, stick figure girls holding hands, and the same rabbit drawn over and over. And on one corner of every page, the same word, still here. Danner's hand trembled as he thumbed through them. The last page had a single drawing, just a pair of eyes behind slats. There had been a false wall in the basement, cleverly crafted. Behind it, what had once been a crawl space, was a hidden room. It was empty now. No child, no remains. But the remnants were there, blankets, an old tin cup, a box of chalk, and a name, scrawled in hundreds of tiny, desperate repetitions across the inner wall. Susie Wells. Susie Wells. Susie Wells. The horror wasn't in the blood. There had been none. The horror was in the silence. The way this place had existed, undetected, for years while a town tore itself apart looking for a missing child. Sheriff Danner called it in. The FBI swept the house. Forensics teams arrived. But the trail was cold. Rowan had lived alone. No records. No one knew of him in connection with the Wells family. How had he taken Susanna? How had he held her? Had she escaped? Had she died elsewhere? There were no answers. Only that she had once been here. The media storm was instant. Catherine Wells sat at her kitchen table, staring at the photo long after the house had emptied. It was her daughter. There was no doubt. The little cleft in her chin. The shirt with the crooked patch she had sewn herself. But the date on the back of the photo chilled her to the marrow. April 2nd, 1980. 5 years after the disappearance. Susanna had been alive. For years. The town reeled. Every theory was revisited. Every name re-examined. The Sleepover girls were interviewed again, now adults, each one broken in different ways. Rachel, still haunted by the night, and the girl who simply wasn't there anymore. Sarah, who'd seen a shape in the mirror that night, watching us. And Elaine, whose diary revealed a new entry. Asterisk, Susanna told me someone comes to her window sometimes. She says he leaves candy. I thought she was lying. I hope she was lying. Asterisk, parents everywhere slept with doors double-bolted now. Not because of what happened that night, but because of what didn't. Because it wasn't the woods. It wasn't a killer. It wasn't magic. It was a man. A quiet man. A neighbor nobody noticed. A man with tools and patience and a house with thick walls. Catherine never stopped searching again. She followed the leads the FBI ignored. She paid for private investigators, mapped patterns of vagrants, traveled to halfway homes and shelters with the photo in hand. Then, in 1983, in a small town in Nevada, a woman approached her. She worked at a women's refuge. She said a girl had come in years ago, frightened, malnourished, unable to speak for weeks. She said she called herself Zon. She drew rabbits. But by the time Catherine arrived, the girl was gone again. Vanished. No forwarding trail. Still, Catherine clung to the hope like a mother cradles a baby. Even after Peter left her. Even after her hair grayed and her hands trembled. Even when hope had every reason to expire. In 1991, a postcard arrived. It wasn't signed. No return address. Just a photo of a rabbit on a park bench and 6 words. Tell Mom I'm still out here. She never heard again. But that was enough. Sallow Creek never fully recovered. Parents spoke in hushed tones. Birthdays were quiet affairs now. Sleepovers ended before dusk. The house where all happened was sold, then burned in an electrical fire in 1984. Today, there's a new house there. A new family. They don't know the whole story, only fragments. The kids still play in the yard, and once in a while, if you ask them, they'll say there's a girl who waves from the trees. She has a rabbit, they say. But she never talks. Maybe it's just a story. Maybe it's something more. But the name Susanna Wells is still whispered in Sallow Creek. Not as a memory, but as a warning. For sometimes, what's gone is never truly gone. Sometimes it's still watching, still waiting, still here.